Frank arrived at the southern settlement just before dusk. What he found was barely a settlement at all. Walls held together with rope and prayer, people thinner than the last time he'd seen them. But they were alive, and that was enough to build on.
I'm not gonna lie to you. War is coming south. A man named Cronus. He won't stop until everything is his. The odds are bad, real bad. But we've survived worse. And I need every one of you. Women, children, you're moving east tonight. The rest of us, we build.
They didn't cheer. They didn't need to. Frank wasn't a warrior, never had been. But he'd watched Blade long enough to learn what mattered. Not the sword, but the ground you stand on. He put the tribe on high alert, evacuated the civilians to the eastern caves, women, children, anyone who couldn't fight. Then he did what he did best. He built walls, traps, barricades. Frank carried the weight of the entire southern defense, not with a blade, but with his hands and his mind. While Frank fortified the south, Blade and Red climbed east. The wasteland gave way to black rock and sulfuric vents. The air thinned, the ground cracked beneath their boots like old bone. They saw the signs long before they saw the fortress. Skulls on stakes, territorial markings burned into stone. They called her Bloody Mary, not as a joke, but as a warning. She'd risen to power the only way the mountains allowed, through blood. Her enemies didn't just die, they were displayed. She painted herself in what she took from them, and her warriors followed. An entire tribe baptized in violence. The mountains were their fortress, and no army had ever breached them. Mary had every right to be confident. The land itself fought for her. They didn't reach the fortress. The fortress reached them. Painted warriors appeared from the rock itself, armed, silent, surrounding them in seconds. Blade and Red were brought before Bloody Mary in a hall carved from volcanic stone, lit by fire pits that cast shadows like living things.
The fallen king. I heard you were in a cage. You look like it.
I need your army.
You need a lot of things. Why should I bleed for your war?
Because Cronus won't stop at my lands. He'll come for yours next.
Let him come. The mountains have swallowed better men. Dagger thought the same. She's dead.
Silence filled the hall. Bloody Mary studied the man before her and didn't recognize him. She remembered a savage, a conqueror who burned without hesitation. What stood before her now was restrained, controlled. She didn't trust it. Blade would fight her champion, not to prove his strength, but to show her the old Blade was still in there somewhere. The pit was carved into the mountain's belly. Torchlight danced across stone walls, stained with old blood. Bloody Mary's champion stepped forward, and the crowd went silent. He was enormous. A head taller than Blade, arms like forged iron, carrying a war blade that no ordinary man could lift. Scars covered him like a map of every fight he'd survived, and he'd survived them all. Blade was weaker than he'd ever been. Prison and the long road had hollowed him out. But the wasteland had taught him something no arena could: how to fight when you have nothing left to lose. The champion charged. Steel met steel, and the sound rang through the mountain like a bell. The champion's first swing drove Blade back 3 steps. The second nearly took his head. Blade parried, barely, his arms shaking under the force. He swung back. The champion caught his blade like it was nothing and threw him across the pit. Blade hit the stone wall and tasted blood, but he rose. Again and again the champion drove him down. Again and again Blade stood. His sword found openings, small ones, a cut across the ribs, a slash to the thigh. Nothing that slowed the giant, but enough to prove he was still in the fight. The crowd roared. Blades clashed over and over, sparks flying in the torchlight, the sound of steel on steel echoing off blood-stained walls. The final exchange was the ugliest. The champion swung wide, a killing blow. Blade ducked under it, drove his shoulder into the giant's chest, and brought his blade up through the gap in the armor. The champion staggered, swayed, and fell. Blade stood over him, breathing ragged, blood running down his face, sword trembling in his hand. He'd won. Barely. But he'd won. And Bloody Mary saw what she'd been looking for, and what she hadn't. He won, but he didn't destroy. He held something back. The old blade would have torn the man apart, savaged him, made a show of it. This one just survived.
You won. But where's the fire? Where's the man who burns cities? You think restraint wins wars? Against Cronus? Against what's coming? We don't need a soldier, Blade. We need the monster. The one who would do anything, become anything Sem to win.
He's still here. I just keep him on a leash.
Then you'd better be ready to let go. Because leashes break Sem, and if yours doesn't break at the right time, we all die. I'll make sure it doesn't come to
Bloody
that.
Mary held Red's gaze for a long moment. She didn't trust the new blade, but she respected what she saw in Red. And Cronus was no distant threat. He was a real one. The alliance was forged, not in trust, but in necessity. And in the wasteland, that was enough. On the ridgeline above the fortress, Mwyn watched from the shadows. He'd found Blade, but he didn't move. Too many fighters, too close to Bloody Mary's strength. He was patient. He would wait for Blade to leave the safety of the mountains, catch them vulnerable on the open road. Mwyn was many things. Reckless was not one of them. And to the south, Cronus marched. Columns of warriors stretched across the wasteland like a dark river, siege weapons, war banners, an army that didn't need to hide. While Frank hammered fortifications into place and sent the last civilians east, the shadow of Cronus grew longer. Three forces converging. The wasteland held its breath. At dawn, the combined force moved west. Bloody Mary's warriors, painted, drumming, terrible in their discipline, marched alongside Blade and Red. Torches cut through the morning mist. The sound of war drums echoed off the mountains like a second heartbeat. And in the shadows behind them, Mwyn followed, counting, waiting. For the first time since his empire fell, Blade marched not as a tyrant, but as a soldier. Whether the world would let him stay that way remained to be seen.